Hello everyone, this is Solomon Koiraj once again in the channel of HR with Solomon. Nice to see you again. Today we have a great guest among us. She is the founder and CEO of Ethree Consulting and her new venture of NeuroWorks with their overall experience of 20 years of leadership at the major firms like RSA and Johnson and INC. And she is expert in culture, engagement, and fascinating the intersection of neuroscience and leadership with the HR skill set. Please join with me. Welcome the cultural architect herself, Jess Chapman. Jess, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you, Solomon. Thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about HR and how important it is and what we do and how broad what we do is. So thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. When I was going through your profile, it was quite amusing that you have already have a consulting company and you recently started a new venture called Neuroscience. Could you able to tell us the company, what you do, like what the HR
Sure.
of area of your?
Yeah. So we have two businesses, as you rightly pointed out. So the first business we have is Ethree Consulting. So Ethree came from engage, enable, empower, which are the three things that I think we need in organizations in order for them to succeed. Right? We want to engage people so they're connected to the organization. We want to enable them with the right skills and tools to deliver, and then we need to empower them to go out and act. And so Ethree is an HR and people consultancy firm. We do fractional HR, we do people consulting, we do training work primarily for businesses with between 10 and 250 employees, with folks that often don't have their own HR teams or certainly don't have an L&D team to help them. But we also do work with larger organizations in things like leadership development and culture work. And then to your point, I started NeuroWorks last year. So NeuroWorks is different. NeuroWorks is an applied neuroscience for the workplace organization. So still framing up what we do, but you might have seen we have a podcast, Wired to Work, which is all about work today and how work needs to evolve for the word that we're in. And we're shortly launching a Patreon community around that podcast and looking at some apps and tools that help us create workplaces that are designed with humans and the brain in mind. So we're still running work based on management models and theory from like the early 90s, not really leveraging what we understand about how people function today and more importantly how people actually live today. And so that's what NeuroWorks will be exploring in the future. So those are the two different businesses, and you can learn more about both of them, e3.ca and neuroworks.ca.
So technically, could say the new venture, the neuroscience is going to have like emotional intelligence, like with the people, what the brain thinks and how the emotion intelligence. It's more of like
Yes.
emotional intelligence.
Yeah, all of that. So, and it's really important for me, like the work that I do. So, I didn't start my career in HR. I found HR as a career path, and I think that actually we're having a guest on the podcast in a little while, Dr. Joe Burrell, who's talking a lot about how HR is evolving, and brain science for me and understanding neuroscience is going to be one of those frontiers that HR people are going to need to get their head around because it's shaping work. And so you're not necessarily going to be a neuroscience expert, but getting an understanding of how the brain works, why people do the things that they do, getting ahead of some of that before organizations work, I think is really important.
So that's a great insight, a new sector for the HR to look upon. Thanks for
Yes.
your intro. And I want to move upon the segment one. Named it this section like session as leadership and scale, driving performance at the scale. At RSA, you managed the engagement for 4,000 employees. It's a huge crowd. And what are the pillars of high performance culture at any work of company size?
Well, that's a great question. Well, so there are, when we're thinking about engagement specifically, not everybody even still knows what engagement is. So when we're talking about employee engagement, it is the extent to which people feel connected to their organization, right? So that you are passionate about what goes on in the organization and you feel connected to the purpose or mission of the organization. And Gallup, the organization Gallup, are probably one of the foremost organizations that measure engagement globally. And they have their framework, the Q12, which looks at 12 questions that are a really good place to start. But I always found the Q12 a little bit difficult to remember. Right, when you're trying to, if you're a leader trying to think about how do I engage my team, got these 12 questions, I got to try and remember what the Q12 are, and like that's a little bit too much. So what we did at E3 is simplify down. So we probably have two models in this area. One is called our people effectiveness model, and the other is the four pillars. So the people effectiveness model is the model we use to look at what makes an effective organization for people. That's why we called it people effectiveness model. And so strategy and culture are in the middle, right? So you need a clear strategy and direction so people can attach to the purpose of the organization, and then you want culture that supports the strategy. You might have heard of Peter Drucker. He's the management guru, and he said a long time ago, culture will eat strategy for breakfast. And that kind of quote has stuck around for a long time because it's very true. So strategy and culture are at the heart of a strong organization. And then we have structure. So structure follows strategy. You need the people, the structure to deliver on your strategy. And then we have leadership and governance, right? So we need the right people, role modeling culture, overseeing the work, ensuring that everything is functioning. And then we overlay around the outside of that all of the people practices that support delivery in the organization. And so when we're looking at an organization and assessing how it's working, that's what we look at from a people perspective. But if you're thinking about like how good is my organization at retaining people, at getting people to stay here, deliver for us, that engagement question, then that's where our 4 pillars model comes in. And so that's about 4 questions that you want people to answer a resounding yes to tell you that they're highly engaged. And they are very simple. It's, do you know why you're here? Right. So that is, I feel connected to the organization. I know the mission of the organization. I understand my job here and I understand how my job connects to that mission. Do you feel like you fit in? So do you feel like you have a voice? You're part of a team. Your opinion counts. You feel like you're connected to people who value you as a person. Do you have what you need to succeed? So do you have the tools, equipment, resources, etc., to deliver on your job? Because that nothing irritates people more than that if they don't know what they're doing. And then lastly, do you know how you're doing? So is someone giving you feedback, recognition, career growth, potential mentoring, all those types of things. And so if someone says yes, I know why I'm here. Yes, I feel like I fit in. Yes, I have what I need to succeed at. Absolutely, yes, I know how I'm doing. The chances are that they're highly engaged at work with you and they're going to give you 50% more discretionary effort than somebody who isn't. And so those, like, we use that lots of different ways in organizations, but even just in a one-to-one check with somebody. So do you know why you're here? Do you feel like you're fitting in? Do you feel like you've got what you need to succeed? Do you know how you're doing? If they're like, well, yeah, then that's no, and we've got a gap to close.
Yeah. Based upon the conversation, I feel that if the employee is feeling burned out in an organization, which means that employment engagement is not with the organization, based upon the conversation, everyone can break it like what exactly needs the burnout.
Yes, well, and burnout is a very complex topic. So this is a really good point, right? So trying to figure out burnout is interesting. And one of the reasons we started NeuroWorks is because we are creating workplaces today. Like we know the statistics show like 50% of the world, so 50% North America actually, say they feel stressed on a daily basis, right? And the numbers are higher amongst the lower generations than they are about the older generations. And so we're doing something. There's all kinds of opinions, there's all kind of research on what that something is, right? But to your point, a lot of it is coming for people for work, right? The way work is shaped, the way that work fits or doesn't into their daily lives and those types of things. And so when we think about burnout, there is a whole world in the neuroscience space that we will be exploring around cognitive load and emotional load of work and recovery, right? So if you're doing, particularly think about HR, the work that we do in HR is often heavy, right? Heavy work, right? Where hiring people is great, but there's lots of complexity to navigating who you hire and accommodations and all that kind of stuff. And then you've got salary conversations and accommodations and exits and often layoffs and cultural changes and all types of things that are quite emotionally heavy. And so HR folks tend to be the people that absorb a lot of that work and a lot of that load. So thinking about if that's the kind of work you're doing, when do you recover from that work? And what I think is happening, part of what I think is happening, is that people don't have recovery at work. And so they go home, but our lives at home are now busier than they've ever been and not straightforwards. And people have children and caring responsibilities. And so nobody is getting recovery. And so what's happening is we've got these trends around self-care, encouragement, all those things, which are great, but we're not systematically looking at what is it about how we work today that's creating the conditions of burnout, to your point, and how do we manage that? And yes, every person is different, but if we've got a consistent issue around stress and burnout, then we have a system issue, not just a person issue. And we need to look at how do we support the person, but also how do we change the system. So that's a brilliant point.
Now how the employment engagement is key for any organization, that could be a great learning for everyone who is watching this show. So moving upon to the next question, How do you successfully integrate the talent acquisition for the longer term?
Well, so the talent acquisition piece, for me, we often miss a piece in HR about explaining to people how the picture fits together, right? So we would talk about HR as a series of processes as opposed to a holistic way of engaging people and ensuring ultimately that the organization has the resources it needs to deliver on strategy. Like that's what we're talking about. We don't randomly employ people in an organization because we like people, right? We are employing people because we have a certain need for hands and for skills to deliver on the strategy of the organization. And so if we stop talking about talent as being processes, I have to hire someone, I have to onboard someone, I have to performance manage someone, I have to pay someone, those sound like less exciting individual processes that are somebody else's problem. If we start talking about people as the strategic part of a plan, right? This is the resources we need to strategically deliver. That is what a leadership team should care about. They care about the strategy and delivery of the organization. So, really great leadership teams understand inherently that people are a source of competitive advantage. They understand that treating their people well is a win-win. People feel happy, they deliver more, right? So it's a win-win, and that managing the resources of the organization strategically unlocks potential. But it takes some time for people to get there. And if you're not necessarily a people person and you're not necessarily thinking about those things, and HR comes along and starts saying, well, we got to do talent acquisition strategy, or we got to do look at our performance management, then that person's like, why? Like, that's just adding work to my plate. Versus, these are methods to help us ensure that the resources we're paying for in the organization, the right resources, but also then those people are happy and therefore productive, because happy and productive kind of go hand in hand. So, the skill set requirements for HR people today, I think, has changed quite a lot. And there is a specific piece about, now you're in year 2 of your study program, right? So you're probably learning all of the bits about the technical processes of HR, and someone's teaching you the technical delivery of HR. But the skills around influencing people and the skills around being able to think strategically about a business are just as important for an HR person as a technical skill. And I often do see when people come into us as a consulting company, like when they have to put the consulting hat on, it's a big shift, and it shouldn't be, right? As HR people in organizations, we are always consulting. We are consulting to the business on the resources that the business needs. And we are providing advice and guidance and direction and saying, yes, you can do that. And no, you can't do that. And here's what I think you should do. And so we are always consultants. But often what I see is people who see their role as a technical expert in a process as opposed to a strategic influencer of an outcome. And I think when we think about the latter, we have more success moving the dial in organizations than we think about the former. So if you think about talent specifically, when you're trying to integrate to a bigger picture, you're tying it back to that strategy. Like, where does the organization want to be in 3 to 5 years' time? What, therefore, are the people, skills, attitudes, behaviors, capacity that we need? Where are those people coming from? Then, if you don't have a clear picture of the people you've got, right? So, I know we need this, we need 150 people, and we need this skill set. Okay, well, Jess, how many people do we have now? Or we got 82, I think. And what skills do they have? I don't know. Like, I haven't done a skills audit of my people in I don't know how long. How do you know where the gap is to close it? And so that's where learning and development, performance management, all those pieces help inform and grow the people that you have. And if you're not familiar with it, I don't know if they would have taught it in your program, that there's a really good talent strategy. I think it's called the 5 Bs. Don't quote me on that one. So sorry, whoever wrote that framework, if I got the title wrong. But it talks about how you get those resources, right? So do you borrow them? Do you buy them, which is recruitment? Do you bounce them from somewhere else in the organization? So there's a bunch of things like that. And that's, for me, a really good synopsis of the talent picture. We need these resources in order to get to this strategy. These are the processes are about ensuring that picture is achieved. And that's kind of how I would talk about it in an organization.
Without the talent, so that makes
Yes.
sense.
And you said to me earlier that one of the things they're teaching you is around recruitment, right? So the talent attraction side of things. When you're learning about that, do you learn about it in isolation, or you are learning about it as part of resourcing the strategy of the organization?
We have to write a job description and we put it in the out, and we have to create end to end, like internally what we are going to as an organization. And once we got the what the candidate, what we are going to do, how we are going to screen the person, how we are going to roll out our offer. We learned like blending of all this was learned
Right.
in the college program. So which now I
Yes.
can interrelate how the talent is important. Finding a talent is important. Also keeping the talent in the organization for a long term, it's also important.
Yes, and the realities of talent management are go beyond the process, right? So when you talk about like I know how to write a job description, I know then how to write a job ad, I know how to post the ad, I know how to screen, like those are crucial. We can't do that, we can't hire a person. But then there's the reality over the top of that. So let's say you work in a real organization and you have three leaders in your organization who all want to hire someone, and the organization has budget to hire one of those three people. How do you determine which one of those three people gets hired? Which role do you hire, right? So there's a for me there's a piece of HR must know how to appropriately and ethically construct and follow the process. But then there's also the reality of, when does the process not help you, because what you're dealing with is the realities of organizations, and that's back to that strategic influencing portion.
So moving on to the next segment, this is called like Science of Thriving. I named this session. So like the neuroscience frontline, how is the neuroscience is change the way we looked up at the leadership and the particularly the change management in 2026?
I think we've only just begun to see how neuroscience is going to shape what we do. I mean, we've only just started to really think about the application of neuroscience beyond the medical world, I think, in any real degree of effort or focus. And I mean, an indication of that would be there are very, very few secondary education programs that equip people without a medical background to use neuroscience to help them do their jobs better, despite the fact that everybody has a brain. So, when I was doing my various bits and pieces, trying to find a master's program or a PhD program in applied neuroscience that means I don't have to do a clinical program or have a medical background, is really hard. And I'm what's called a neuroplastician, which I've done through an organization called the NBN Hub, which is a global organization for people like me who have an interest in and some background in neuroscience principles. And so, as we have begun to understand more about why people do what they do, that obviously shapes everything around how people work together. It's only really, though, been since we had MRIs, right? Before we had MRIs, if we wanted to study the brain, someone had to have their head cut open. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not going to volunteer to do that. So, there's a piece around, once we had MRIs, the opportunity for us to explore what's happening in the human brain increased significantly. And so I don't like, we're only, I think, at the very beginning of that journey. But starting to understand more about the chemicals that work in the brain, about things like neuroplasticity and how people learn. We're starting to think about like triggers and threat response and how people experience stress, and what we were talking about earlier in terms of burnout, the idea of things like cognitive load and where that comes from, the fact that we can be quite resilient, and that with the ideas and concepts of things like neuroplasticity, how we learn, how we adapt, like the we're ever changing individuals, all of those things for me shape both how we should interact as people in the workplace and beyond, but also how we design work and therefore how we design leadership. And there's some really great stuff out there now from people who have neuroscientists with backgrounds. Some of them have come on my podcast. So I'm recording on Friday, actually, with a gentleman out of California, Dr. Paul Zak, who's a neuroscientist who has created a tool, an app called Immersion, that measures your experience at work. What an amazing thing to be able to do, to real time be able to say, I'm totally immersed and loving what I'm doing right now, or I'm really not, right? And the opportunity to use that kind of data to think about culture and engagement and those types of things is massive. And so we have gone out and got trained as NeuroWorks in his tools so we can apply those tools to the workplace. So imagine being a leader and you get an app that tells you how much your team is loving what they're doing right now, how immersed they are in what they're doing, how comfortable they feel being themselves. And that is data that you get access to and they get access to encourage you to have better conversations about what's the right fit for them and the right culture. So I think, honestly, Solomon, I think we're at the very beginning of the journey. And I would encourage anybody who's studying HR today to stick their toe into the world of neuroscience and think about how that's going to affect what HR does going forwards.
By hearing you, I think there's a lot of things is going to come on the neuroscience. Probably like everyone has to subscribe to the neuroscience podcast. My next question is, a kind of interesting question. How do you can use the brain science to build a strong team connection in terms of working remotely or hybridly? For an example, we have one team in one location and another team in another location, or like the entire team is completely working remotely.
Yes. So the world of remote and hybrid, I think that's where we largely are. Now we have clients who are back in the office, and we have clients like construction world never left. So we always talk about getting back to the office. Some people never left the office, right? So there's definitely that going on. I think that there's lots of things I could say about the neuroscience world in response to hybrid work. Excuse me. Um, but probably the two biggest things I would talk about would be communication and relating. Human beings are designed to connect to other human beings, right? We need social connection to thrive. And the screen environment is good, but it is not the same. And so if you're going to largely be connecting with people virtually, and my team is virtual, we got rid of the office in 2020, we went virtual and we're not going back. You need to be more intentional about a number of things, and cameras are part of that. Take communication, for example. So when we communicate, we're not just communicating through our choice of words, we're communicating through our body language, our tone of voice, right? All the gestures we make, those types of things. And a large portion of what we communicate is not the words, it is the tone of voice and the body language. So if I can't see you, then I don't read you in the same way. I'm not able to see what your gesture is. So I could sit here and say, yeah, I totally love chatting with Solomon on the podcast. It's really great. And you should be able to see that my face is more expressive and my tone is lighter, and that all matches. But I could sit here and say, yeah, I really love talking to Solomon on the podcast today. Right? And the tone of voice is different. The words are the same, but the tone of voice is different. And my facial expression tells you a whole world of pain that I didn't convey the first time around. So if you're working remotely and all you're doing is interacting through Slack and text or whatever your method is, Teams, whatever it happens to be, you're missing out on a large portion of that communication. And that's what cements relationships. That's what helps us understand one another. That's what helps create rapport. And so you have to be much more intentional about disclosing things to people. You have to be much more intentional about explaining things to people, all of those pieces. And so you have to be much more mindful about how you create connection in a remote world than you do in a real world situation. And it's literally that simple. How you do it, there's tons of potential ways of thinking about it. It depends on your organization, your schedules, your teams, and everything else. But if you are not intentional about building connection and relationships, everything else will be harder for that person working remotely.
Yeah, that's correct. Like I want to know, like what I have, the more focus on in person, like the communication, be the brain, that attracts to the person telling the information. It's a good example.
I mean, you talked earlier about emotional intelligence, right? And so for me, we do things because of our brains. Our brains are what controls us. We are all of this, right? So when you're talking to someone, if you understand how brains work, you have a better chance of understanding how that person works, right? If you understand more about their habits and their preferences. We talk about personality, but really we're talking about preferences, right? In the HR space, not so much personality. Like what are the habits of that person? What are the preferences about how they do things? What are the triggers that they have, right? So everyone has motivations. We're all wired for threat and reward. When you understand some of those frameworks, and we in the people space don't need to understand the brain anywhere near the same as a neuroscientist who's going to do surgery on your brain. We just need to understand concepts about how people do things and interact. If you understand more about those, then you have more ability to tailor and adapt, which is what you're talking about. And the managing change space is a great example, right? Understanding people's reactions, emotional responses, what causes those, what is regulation, how do you help somebody regulate, what does stress do to the brain? If you're introducing some change on top of a already stressed organization, where are people likely to land? All of those things just allow you to navigate the situation more easily.
What is the one piece of advice you could tell me, like before we clue up on the fresh graduates like me, or like who is stepping into a new world of HR?
I'm only allowed to give one. Gosh, that's one is hard. Just one is
No,
hard.
now like you can list out like 2 or 3. It's not a problem.
Just get tied to on your answer. Okay, so the first thing I would say is we had a brief conversation before we started recording that I think is an important point, which is HR is a lot of things. But if it's to do with people in the workplace, I'd say it falls under the HR umbrella. So don't narrow in too quickly on what it is you want to do. When I first moved to Newfoundland and I said to people I worked in HR, they were like, "Oh, you do recruitment?" I was like, "No." And they were like, "Oh, you do union negotiations?" "No." "Oh, you do payroll?" "No." "What do you do then? Do you fire people?" "No." So, like, I mean, I can do all of those things, but that wasn't my job, right? And so, you know, explore would be my answer, because the best HR people, from my perspective, are people that understand the picture, how all of it fits together. They don't just know recruitment or learning or compensation or union relations. They understand the impact of what they're doing, their piece of that puzzle, how their process fits into the strategic delivery of the organization through the resources and the people. And so go play around in different bits of HR and see which bits you really love, because the chances are you're not going to get brilliant at all of it. It's too much, right? So go play around. That's the first thing I'd say. Secondly, get good with numbers, because the thing that HR people get told over and over and over again is that we're terrible with finance. We're not finance. We don't do numbers. If you work in an organization, you need to understand finances. You need to understand how the organization works. You need to understand what a P&L is. You need to understand the bottom line of an organization, how the money is made, where the money goes to. It doesn't matter if it's nonprofit, if it's privately owned, if it's government, doesn't matter. You need to understand how fiscally an organization is run, because people are often the biggest expense, right? And you're going to get challenged over and over and over again on what we're doing with people. So start now thinking about, maybe you don't love numbers, maybe they're not your cup of tea. That's perfectly fine. You don't have to be a finance person, but start thinking about, how do I understand how an organization works and how those things are done. And thirdly, read. I mean, I don't necessarily just mean read, because I don't love reading non-fiction books. I like reading non-fiction articles like Harvard and stuff, but consume a vast variety of information about HR. The world is moving very quickly. HR is moving quickly too. If you're talking today about engagement and emotional intelligence, you're out of date. Right? We're done. With, like, those were 15 years ago. Today, we're talking neuroscience, we're talking about frameworks, we're talking about teal organizations, octopus, agility, AI integration. If you're still talking about frameworks and concepts as if they are new, not to say they don't exist, emotional intelligence is still really valid, engagement is still really important, but those are no longer new concepts. Those are things should be embedded in an organization and running by now. So make sure you are reading so that you are bringing new things to your organization. And this is a personal bias, but I would say, think of your role as a consultant. You are a consultant to the organization. You are the cutting edge owner of all things people. You are the person who knows what's new in people. You should be bringing that to your organization to say, this is how we make the most of the environment that we have for the people that we have. Because if I do that, the environment and the results of the organization go up, but the well-being and the happiness of our people also goes up, and then everybody wins. So that, I think that was 4, so I snuck a 3 extra in there, Solomon, but that was my 4.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
great message. But honestly speaking, many students believe that numbers is not part of them, because the part of our program we have to learn the accounting stuff. It's a great message, like we have to put all the things, because everything, money is matter, people matter. Probably many people to reach out to you to learn about more about the neuroscience. And I could say, by listening your podcast on the neuroscience or NeuroWorks, it's a great benefit for the new HR people out there.
Yes.
And thanks for your time. It's a great honor to have you.
I was thrilled to be asked. I'm happy to chat again. I've always got an opinion. Everybody who knows me knows I've got an opinion, so like that's not a problem. Yeah, and yes, Wired to Work is our podcast. Apple, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube. So you can join there, and we will shortly be launching a community around that, so you can join the community and get tools and tips and extra content, those types of things. So might be of benefit to folks that are out there. But yes, if you're not thinking numbers is your game, that's fine. You don't have to be a finance person, but you do need to understand that HR and people might be the limbs of the organization, but money is still the blood.
Yeah. With this, Our show is coming to an end. Thanks for being in show. Thanks for being watching this show. See you in the next show. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Take care, Solomon. Bye.
Bye.